Imagine living in a neighborhood where every little detail of your life was scrutinized. The color of your mailbox, the length of your grass, even the way you parked your car. For some people, this constant oversight was tolerable. But for one, man, the real battle began with something far more ordinary. His trash can. At first, it seemed like an accident. He would wheel his bin out to the curb on collection day, only to return later and find it tipped over. Bags of garbage spilled across the sidewalk, the contents exposed to the entire neighborhood. It was embarrassing, humiliating even, and the kind of thing you wanted to believe had a simple explanation. Perhaps the wind, perhaps a stray animal, but deep down, he knew better, because every time it happened, one figure seemed to be watching. From across the street, the HOA's most notorious enforcer, the woman everyone quietly referred to as Karen. She lived 3 houses down, and her reputation for policing the smallest infractions was legendary. Neighbors whispered about her constant complaints, her habit of photographing houses for evidence, and her eagerness to file reports with the board. She wasn't just a busybody, she was a storm in human form, and once she set her sights on you, life became unbearable. The man tried to brush it off. He picked up the trash, straightened the can, and told himself not to overthink, but the pattern kept repeating. Every week, without fail, the bin ended up knocked over, and every week, Karen's blinds twitched at just the right moment, as if she wanted him to know she was behind it, but not quite bold enough to admit it outright. Soon, the situation escalated. One morning, he discovered the lid missing entirely. Another day, he found the wheels cracked, the bin dented as if deliberately kicked. And then came the letter, an official notice from the HOA accusing him of failing to properly secure his trash. The irony was staggering. The very person responsible for sabotaging him was now using her power to punish him for it. That's when frustration turned to anger. This wasn't just about garbage anymore. This was about control, about someone who thrived on pushing others to the edge and hiding behind rules to justify it. The man realized he couldn't just let it continue. He needed a plan, something that would stop Karen in her tracks, once and for all. But what could he do? She was relentless, armed with her clipboard, her phone camera, and the board's backing. If he fought her openly, he risked more fines, more harassment, more humiliation. Yet if he stayed silent, she would keep winning. It was during one particularly frustrating evening, after gathering trash that had been scattered across his lawn again, that inspiration struck. He thought back to a conversation he'd overheard at work, about how technology could make even the most mundane objects smarter. Cameras, sensors, timers, all embedded in everyday things. And suddenly, he knew exactly what he had to do. He would give Karen the trash can she never saw coming. Not just any bin, but one that would turn the tables, expose the truth, and finally end her reign of petty terror. The idea was bold, maybe even risky, but after months of silent suffering, he was ready. As he sketched out his plan, a strange mix of excitement and dread settled in. This wasn't just about outsmarting Karen. It was about reclaiming peace in his own home, about standing up against someone who believed she was untouchable. The man didn't know yet how far this battle would go, or how much chaos it would unleash across the neighborhood. But he was prepared for whatever came next, because the trash can wars had only just begun, and soon everyone in the HOA would see exactly what happens when you push the wrong person too far. The man knew that if he wanted to win this silent war, he couldn't confront Karen directly. She thrived on confrontation. She wanted a shouting match on the street, something she could twist into a violation or complaint. No, the only way to beat her was with proof. Cold, undeniable evidence that showed the world exactly what she was doing. So he began his project in secret. Late at night, when the neighborhood was quiet, he worked in his garage with the door half closed, just enough to keep prying eyes from seeing what he was up to. On the workbench sat his ordinary trash can, scuffed and dented from months of accidents. But by the time he was done with it, this bin would be anything but ordinary. He ordered small motion-activated cameras, the kind barely bigger than a button, and carefully mounted them inside the rim. He added a sensor that would trigger the recording whenever the bin was moved, tipped, or tampered with. And because Karen was cunning, he knew she might try to strike at night, under the cover of darkness. So he equipped the setup with infrared vision, ensuring nothing escaped the lens. Piece by piece, the smart trash can came together. It looked perfectly ordinary on the outside, but hidden within was a trap waiting to be sprung. He tested it repeatedly, shaking the bin, rolling it across the driveway, even pushing it over himself, watching with satisfaction as the camera blinked to life each time. But building the trap was only half the battle. He had to make sure Karen didn't suspect a thing. If she knew she was being watched, she would change her behavior or find another way to torment him. The genius of his plan was that she would reveal herself willingly, exposing her own malice without ever realizing she was being recorded. The first night he wheeled the new bin to the curb, his heart pounded. He lingered by the window, watching. The streetlights flicker across the pavement. For hours, nothing happened. Then, around midnight, he saw the faintest movement across the road. Curtains shifted, a shadow flickered, and slowly, Karen's unmistakable figure emerged from her house. She crept toward the bin like a thief, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. Then, with a swift kick, she sent it tumbling into the street. The bag split open, scattering across the asphalt. The man clenched his fists, torn between anger and satisfaction, because this time she wasn't just humiliating him. This time, the hidden camera captured every second. The next morning, he reviewed the footage. There she was, in crystal clear detail, Karen in her slippers and robe, kicking the bin like it was her sworn enemy. Her smug glance at his house afterward sealed the evidence. No excuses, no denials. She was caught, but instead of rushing to expose her, he waited. One video wasn't enough. If he wanted the HOA and the entire neighborhood to believe him, he needed a pattern, undeniable proof of her relentless sabotage, so he let it continue. Each week, Karen repeated the same performance. Sometimes she kicked it. Sometimes she shoved it. Once, she even tried to pry open the lid and scatter the contents by hand. And each time, the trash can recorded her every move. The man's collection of evidence grew. Dozens of clips, all showing the same thing. A neighbor abusing her power, tormenting someone she believed couldn't fight back. And with each recording, his confidence grew. Still, a question lingered: how to reveal it. He could submit the footage to the HOA board. But what if Karen manipulated them? She had influence, friends on the inside, and a way of twisting the narrative. No, he needed something bigger, something that couldn't be silenced or ignored. And as he considered his next move, another thought struck him. What if he turned Karen's tactics against her? What if the same woman who thrived on public humiliation found herself exposed in the most public way possible? The man didn't know it yet, but his plan was about to escalate far beyond a simple neighborhood feud. Because once the truth came out, there would be no going back, and Karen would never see it coming. By the time he had weeks of footage saved, the man knew he was holding dynamite. Each clip was more damning than the last, showing the same ritual. Karen sneaking out under cover of night, scanning the street for witnesses, then sending his trash, flying like it was some personal vendetta. It wasn't just mischief anymore. It was obsession, but the man also knew this was more than a private feud. Karen wasn't just tormenting him. She was making a statement to the whole neighborhood. Her message was simple. She could do whatever she pleased, and no one could stop her. And for years, that had been true. She bullied residents with petty fines, wrote threatening notes, and spread rumors through HOA meetings like wildfire. Most people stayed silent, fearing retaliation. Now, he had the chance to end that reign. The question was how. If he handed the footage to the HOA board, there was no guarantee they'd act. Some members owed favors to Karen. Others feared her sharp tongue and constant complaints. She was a master manipulator, skilled at flipping the story to make herself look like the victim. No, he needed a method that bypassed her influence entirely. Something the whole neighborhood, and maybe even the world, could see. That's when the idea struck him. Social exposure, not just showing the footage, but crafting a story around it. The truth, packaged in a way that no one could deny. He spent days editing the clips together, splicing the footage from different nights into one seamless sequence. Each cut revealed the same pattern. Karen, in slippers and robe, approaching, the bin like clockwork, sending it crashing over and walking away with smug satisfaction. He slowed the footage at key moments, zooming in on her face, highlighting the cruel grin she thought no one could see. When the compilation was finished, he tested it on a trusted friend, someone outside the HOA, with no ties to the neighborhood. Drama. Their reaction said it all. Shock, disgust, and then laughter at the sheer absurdity of it. "This is gold," they said. "If you put this online, it'll blow up." And the man realized that was exactly what he wanted. But before going public, he staged one more step. He uploaded the video privately, set it to play on a large monitor, and invited a handful of neighbors he trusted, people who had their own stories about Karen. Missed mail, fines for unapproved lawn ornaments, threats over holiday decorations. They gathered in his living room, skeptical at first, but as the footage played, the room erupted. Gasps, whispers, then a collective realization they weren't alone. For the first time, Karen's control cracked. Word spread quickly. Those neighbors told others, and soon the entire street was buzzing with rumors. People who had stayed silent began sharing their own Karen encounters, emboldened by the knowledge that someone had finally caught her red-handed. And as pressure built, the man prepared for his next move, the moment of maximum impact. He scheduled the release. One click, and the footage would no longer be confined to his hard drive or his living room. It would be free for anyone to see, neighbors, the HOA, strangers online, maybe even local news. He sat at his computer late one night, finger hovering over the upload button. His heart pounded, because once he hit it, there was no going back. The war with Karen had been private, confined to their street, but soon it would be public. And Karen's world, the power she held, the fear she inspired, was about to collapse in front of everyone. The man took a deep breath and clicked upload. The upload was barely an hour old before the first comments began to pour in. At first, it was just curious strangers, people scrolling late at night who stumbled onto the video titled, "Caught on camera, HOA Karen keeps knocking my trash can over." The footage spoke for itself. No commentary, no dramatization. Just a clear sequence of nights where Karen, in her robe and slippers, strutted across the driveway like she owned the world, knocking over the bin with theatrical flair. Within hours, the views doubled, then tripled. By morning, the video had gone viral. Clips circulated on social media with captions like, "This is peak HOA insanity," and "Imagine living next to this woman." Reaction channels picked it up, influencers dissected it, and meme pages had a field day. The man's quiet street had suddenly become the internet's favorite stage. And Karen? She had no idea, at least not yet. By midday, neighbors started whispering. Those who hadn't been invited to the private screening were now watching the viral video on their phones, showing each other during morning walks, and chuckling in hushed tones. Some replayed the footage with sheer satisfaction, finally seeing the neighborhood bully exposed for what she truly was. Others shook their heads in disbelief that someone could spend so much energy on such petty cruelty. But as the laughter grew, Karen's world began to shrink. The first sign came when she stormed into the HOA office demanding to know who was spreading lies. The staff tried to remain professional, but even they had already seen the video. One assistant struggled not to laugh as Karen insisted the footage was doctored. She stomped out, red-faced, only to find two teenagers across the street, pointing their phones at her, whispering and giggling. Karen wasn't just a local nuisance anymore. She was a meme, and the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. That evening, the man watched from behind his blinds as Karen marched up and down the street, banging on doors. She ranted about slander, about conspiracies, about vindictive neighbors trying to ruin her reputation. But no one opened their doors fully. They cracked them open just enough to listen, then quietly shut them again. For years, Karen had thrived on intimidation. Now, the balance had shifted. Every move she made was under suspicion. Every glare, every muttered complaint. It all seemed like proof that the video was right. By the end of the week, the story hit local news. A segment aired with the headline, "HOA resident caught harassing neighbor on camera." Reporters blurred the man's house for privacy, but had no such mercy for Karen. Her face, her nightly routine, was now broadcast to thousands in her own city. The fallout was immediate. Karen's phone rang nonstop, with friends and family, demanding explanations. Some believed her denials, but many quietly distanced themselves, unwilling to defend behavior so clearly captured on tape. The once feared Karen found herself isolated, trapped in the very neighborhood she once ruled. She couldn't step outside without someone watching. Every knock at her door could be another neighbor ready to confront her. Every glance in her direction carried the weight of judgment, but Karen wasn't the type to surrender. If anything, the exposure only fueled her anger. Behind closed doors, she plotted. She filed complaints with the HOA board, demanding fines against the man for unauthorized surveillance. She contacted lawyers, searching for loopholes. She even started spreading rumors, wild stories that painted herself as the victim of a targeted smear campaign. And yet, the footage didn't lie. The man, watching all of this unfold, knew the war was far from over. Karen wasn't just embarrassed. She was cornered, and a cornered Karen was the most dangerous kind of neighbor. The next strike wouldn't be a trash. It would be something bigger, something personal, and he needed to be ready. Karen's downfall should have ended with embarrassment, but humiliation has a way of hardening into obsession. And Karen, stripped of her neighborhood authority, wasn't about to retreat quietly into the shadows. The man had expected her to lick her wounds, maybe avoid eye contact for a while, maybe even pretend nothing happened. But instead, Karen doubled down. Her retaliation began slowly, subtle enough to be brushed off as coincidence. First came the anonymous complaints. A notice appeared in the man's mailbox, stamped by the HOA, accusing him of leaving his lawn unkempt. He walked outside, baffled, because his grass was neatly trimmed. Another notice followed about improper storage of bins, then a warning about unauthorized exterior decorations. One by one, violations piled up. It didn't take much detective work to figure out who was behind them. The HOA board, pressured by Karen's relentless presence, begrudgingly filed the complaints. She showed up to every meeting, armed with binders of photographs and long rants about community standards. Most neighbors rolled their eyes, but the paper trail was real. The fines began stacking up, small at first, then more threatening. It was clear. If Karen couldn't control her neighbor's trash can, she'd control his life through rules and red tape. But that was only the beginning. Late one night, just as the man was drifting off to sleep, a loud thud echoed outside. He rushed to the window and spotted a shadow darting away. When he stepped outside, he found his car egged, yolk dripping down the windshield. The next morning, more eggshells lay crushed in the driveway. A day later, his mailbox was stuffed with flyers for lawn services, pest control, and home repairs. Hundreds of them, crammed until the metal bent. Each act was petty, vindictive, and dripping with malice. And through it all, Karen strutted about in broad daylight, smiling wider than ever, as if daring him to accuse her. The man could feel the trap tightening. It wasn't just about trash cans anymore. This was about control, about dominance. Karen wanted to remind the neighborhood, and the internet, that she wasn't defeated. She wanted to break him. But what Karen didn't realize was that her opponent was no longer playing defense. The man began documenting everything. Every HOA notice, every scratch of graffiti, every pile of eggshells, photographed, time-stamped, filed. His cameras weren't just pointed at his trash can anymore. They watched his yard, his driveway, his front porch. Nothing escaped their gaze. Then the tipping point arrived. One evening after returning home from work, he discovered something chilling, a dead rat in his trash can. Not an accident, not some random animal. This one was deliberate. Its placement was too perfect, its timing too suspicious. It was a message. Karen had escalated from harassment to intimidation, and that was her mistake. The man knew he couldn't rely solely on the HOA anymore. Karen had woven herself too deeply into the board's ear. This wasn't a neighborhood squabble now. It was targeted harassment, and if Karen wanted to make this war personal, he was ready to fight on a new battlefield. He compiled his evidence into a massive folder. The videos, the photos, the HOA notices, the egged car, the mailbox sabotage, and now, the rat. It wasn't just proof. It was a case, and soon, Karen would learn that the same internet that laughed at her could also become her greatest nightmare. The man was preparing his next move, one that would push the story beyond viral videos and neighborhood gossip. One that would leave Karen with nowhere left to hide, because this wasn't just about a trash can anymore. This was about survival in a neighborhood that had turned into a battleground, and the war was reaching its peak. The neighborhood was no longer quiet. By now, every resident knew something was brewing between Karen and the man. Some whispered support behind closed doors, others avoided eye contact, unwilling to get caught in the middle, but no one could ignore the escalating tension. Karen had turned the HOA into her weapon, flooding his life with fines and harassment. She thought she had cornered him, that his silence meant surrender. But what Karen didn't realize was that silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Because while she obsessed over knocking down trash cans and planting dead rats, the man was building something stronger than any wall of HOA rules. He was building a case. Weeks of footage showed Karen prowling near his driveway, at night, tossing garbage, egging his car, slipping papers into his mailbox. One clip even captured her crouching, lifting his lid and dropping something inside. Clear as day. He had timestamps, witnesses, and HOA letters, all linked back to her relentless campaign. But he didn't stop there. He uploaded short clips. Online, carefully edited to highlight Karen's obsessive behavior. The internet had already mocked her once, but this time, the evidence was undeniable. Videos of her creeping through the neighborhood at 2 a.m., of her bending over his bin with something clutched in her hand, spread like wildfire. Within days, she was trending again. Memes returned, harsher this time. People called her Trash Can Karen, Midnight Creep Karen, even Garbage Queen. Her name became a punchline, her face a cautionary tale. But while the internet roasted her, the man was preparing his final strike in the real world. With his evidence neatly organized, he contacted local law enforcement. What had started as petty harassment had escalated into criminal acts, property damage, stalking, intimidation. The officers didn't laugh. They listened, they watched, and they nodded. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a liability. The HOA board, too, was forced to confront the truth. With videos circulating online, they could no longer protect their star enforcer. Neighbors began showing up at meetings, angry that their fees were funding lawsuits and chaos. They demanded accountability, and for the first time in years, Karen found herself on the defensive. When the police finally knocked on her door, the neighborhood watched from behind curtains and blinds. The once proud enforcer of rules stood on her porch, arms folded, trying to argue her way out, but no excuse could erase the videos. No rant could undo the eggshells, the rat, the midnight trespassing. Karen wasn't arrested that night, but she was issued a formal warning, one that carried real consequences if she continued. And more importantly, the HOA voted to remove her from her committee position. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood through intimidation and nitpicking had been stripped of her crown. In the weeks that followed, peace slowly returned. Trash cans stood upright. Mailboxes stayed clear. Cars went unegged. The man, at last, could roll his bin to the curb without wondering what ambush awaited him. But the biggest victory wasn't just the quiet, it was the message. Karen had built her power on fear. Fear of rules, fear of fines, fear of public shame. And for years, neighbors bowed to her because it was easier than fighting back. But once her mask slipped, once her obsession was exposed, her power evaporated. The man didn't just win against Karen. He reminded the neighborhood that bullies only thrive when people let them. And though Karen still lived in the cul-de-sac, she no longer patrolled it like a queen. She walked quieter, avoided stares, and kept her distance from his property. Every time she passed his driveway, she couldn't help but glance at the camera, knowing it was always watching. For the man, the battle was over. Not because he destroyed Karen, but because he refused to be destroyed by her. He turned her game against her, using the very attention she craved to unravel her reign. And so, the trash can war ended, not with a bang, but with the hollow silence of Karen's retreat. The neighborhood, once her kingdom, now looked at her not with respect or fear, but with pity. And that, in the end, was the punishment Karen never saw coming.